Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Neuroqueering podcast. I'm your host, Pasha Marlowe, and I am thrilled to bring you today Jessi Purdy. Jessi is an activist, a public speaker, and the CEO and founder of FIC, Human Resource Partners. I don't know what FIC stands for, but we're going to find out in a moment. And I'm so glad to see you again, Jessi. Hi.
Hi, Pasha. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm excited to be speaking with you today.
Absolutely. And of course, now that I read my notes as to what we're going to talk about, because we're going to be talking about how to foster inclusive cultures of belonging. And then I look down, and I think that's probably what FIC stands for, fostering inclusive cultures. Am I right?
It is absolutely. When I first started doing DEI consulting, fostering inclusive cultures was the tagline that I used under my name. So when I incorporated the business as an LLC, I wanted to honor that, and I brought that into the name of the business.
Excellent. I really appreciate that the language around fostering inclusive cultures. I hadn't heard it that way, and I love it. And because I hear DEI all the time, and then I feel like sometimes it just gets lost in the landscape of things. Do you feel like I know as a neurodivergent person, I often go through this lens, and I ask these questions almost right away. But does DEI in general include neurodiversity right now? Is that common now in the conversation? Do you feel like it's part of the
Neurodi
conversation now?
Neurodiversity being part of the conversation is starting to gain some traction within the DEI professional community. The truth is that, when DEI first started, it was really simply about gender and race, and
Mm-hmm.
that was it. It's only been, through concerted effort that the DEI community and the corporate communities have actually started looking at it and going, oh, these intersectional identities are so much broader, and we need to be talking about these different things. And so it seems like each year a new portion of intersectional identities comes to light and becomes a main focus. And so it's really starting to broaden out. We're really starting to get into things like neurodiversity, because for so long that was just simply overlooked. Everybody assumed this is the way we operate. Everybody operates like this because, neurotypical people are the ones who created most of these businesses, and they were designed for the neurotypical mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And what they started discovering is that neurodiverse people, such as ADHD people, bring specific talents to an organization that can actually be of benefit and make them a better employee or a better leader in certain circumstances, if there's a ability for them to function as they are, rather than in a restrained manner, like many of us who were early in life diagnosed with ADHD were like, oh, you have to do this structure and you have to like narrow in and do this, and if you don't do it this way, you're not going to succeed. And so everything became very rigid. It made it even worse.
Right. So if there's a space for them to ask for accommodations, and that conversation is available, then it's helpful. Yeah. And do you
Yeah,
feel like, is there a fear that it's then watering down issues around race and gender and sexual identity if now DEI is expanding so much?
I don't think that it waters it down. I do think that we need to be mindful that as we add focuses, that we don't forget the things that we have yet to finish.
Yes.
Diversity work around race and gender are not finished in the workplace. And we can't wait for them to be finished to worry about every other aspect of our identities to be honored, accepted, and permitted within corporate cultures or even small businesses.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And in the corporations I'm talking to recently, the larger ones, it feels like there's certainly an expanded uh conversation, but sometimes I feel, and maybe it's more in the marketing, the visual marketing, that sometimes I get disappointed by it's not clip art. I'm not using the right terminology, but when you see a photograph and it's like clearly like one person of every ethnicity, and it just feels really contrived, it almost turns me off. Do you know what I mean? Do you have that sense?
I know exactly what you're saying. You have to be careful that when you're using these images, that you're doing them in an authentic way that feels
Yeah.
real. and actually represents the reality of your business or your product. I worked with a company that had a lot of diverse people on their website, and yet they were not a diverse organization, and they did not serve a diverse population.
Yes.
And so that was one of the things that we worked on. I had another client who was very concerned that they wanted to be more diverse, but none of their content was diverse yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a long discussion about how to start bringing diverse imagery and language into their business so that they could promote the culture that they wanted to achieve, and how to do that in an authentic way without, making it seem like they were somewhere in the process that they were not yet.
Yeah, that's so interesting because as a business owner, I just recently led a women's retreat, and all white, I'm in Maine, 6 white women showed up. But in my advertising, I want to be inclusive. I want to be inclusive to all, and I want to show that everyone's welcome. But again, I don't want to misrepresent what is actually likely happening and has happened in the past. So I'm often concerned and confused as to how to market, because I want to show the future possibilities in my marketing and be authentic and truthful. So what is your advice to somebody on that?
Well, my advice is to start with your values
Hmm.
and the guiding principles of your business, and
Hmm.
make sure that they represent the diversity and the inclusion you're seeking to create.
Hmm.
Then start working to bring in teams and content that fits that,
Hmm.
and build from there. You can't
Hmm.
just blanket diversity all over your website, your marketing, and not have done the preparatory work.
Yes.
So you have to start with your values and your guiding principles. Always having good policy written with a diversity, equity, and inclusion mindset, specifically equity. Because if you're achieving equity, then the inclusion comes by default. The diversity comes by default, with a little effort.
Say more about that, because I think maybe people aren't familiar with specifically what each of those terms means, the difference between them. So you say start with equity. How do you mean?
Well, one of the reasons I say start with equity is because you can bring diverse people into an organization, but if your systems and processes aren't equitable, you're not going to be able to retain them, and they're not going to you're not going to foster an inclusive culture where
Hmm.
they feel like they belong and want to stay.
Yes.
If you try to create an inclusive culture, but you haven't taken a look at the equity issues,
Hmm.
then you're not likely to achieve the diversity metric that you're looking for.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is because there are inequities that exist in society at large, in education, and that then creates barriers to access in your business.
Hmm.
And if your own policies are inequitable, such as requiring a 4-year degree for a position that could easily be done on a high school education, you've
Mm.
created an equity. You pardon me. I do get tongue tied. The ADHD brain is racing 100 miles an hour,
I hear you.
and
Yes.
the tongue coordination is going. No, we move at 7:20. Put us on the slow speed on the speaker, on the little record player.
Relatable, relatable.
Um, but if you have that, you've created a barrier to access
Hmm.
that is inequitable, because you are not allowing someone who has the capabilities to come on board simply because they don't have a degree.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. That makes more sense to me. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And do you feel we had talked about this prior to recording, but it still feels important to me to talk about, because I hear this is my intention, but this is the impact. But you switched it to intended versus permitted. Can you explain to the audience why you chose permitted instead? Because that's going to stick with me, and I appreciate that.
Yes. So when we're talking about actions, we're talking about intent and impact. You can intend one thing, but the impact can be something entirely different, because impact is about how it is received. Intent is about how you put it forward.
Mhm.
Now, when we're talking about culture, we're talking about the intended culture, the culture we set out to create, the one that we put in policy, the one that we state in our values, the one that we market to the public because we want to look good. That's our intention. That's our intended culture. However, what actually exists can be vastly different from that intended culture. And that's because we permit things to exist because it's easy. So we can say that we want to hire a diverse team. But if we don't have structures in place that ensure that a local hiring manager is following the equitable guidelines that we set forth to achieve that goal, and we're not following up to make sure that they're meeting those standards, then we're permitting a culture to exist that is different than the one we intend.
Mm.
Does that?
It does. Yeah.
Okay.
It does make sense. It actually reminds me from a trauma-informed therapist and coach perspective, it's no longer recommended to say, I create safe and empathetic space. As much as I intend to and really, really want to, I cannot guarantee that everybody in the room will feel or be safe. And it's been a hard shift because I really, really want to, and I feel like I have the skills to create that. And yet, I was missing the part of the picture about the individual impact, but also what the culture permits given everybody's own wounds and backgrounds and history. So yeah, it's been a current challenge of mine. So I think this is
Absolutely. And, I do workshops. So, when you're doing diversity, equity, inclusion workshops, and you're talking about bias, you're talking about privilege, and you're talking about microaggressions, you're having very difficult conversations. And the goal is to create a space where people feel comfortable being uncomfortable.
mm,
So one of the things that I always set at the beginning of my facilitations when I'm doing a workshop is that I'm going to encourage you to lean into your discomfort as an opportunity for learning.
mhm.
If the conversation we're having is uncomfortable, there's probably something we need to learn from it. And we can't shy away from that discomfort. I I also know that, when we first started doing this kind of work, we all wanted to create these safe spaces and create these safe learning areas. And that's not workable,
Mm,
especially when you have a wide range of people with various identities, with various experiences, who are at various stages of achieving the ideal. um,
mhm,
it's not possible. So you have to create a space where people can be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that
mhm.
takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of intention. And it means you have to do a lot of work.
Yes. And encouraging people to sit with the discomfort and learn from it. Where's then the line or the boundary where they are feeling either unsafe or triggered, or they don't feel like they belong, even though the intention was for them to. That learning can't happen in that environment. And then how does somebody step away?
And so one of the things that I use in my facilitations is what I call a yellow flag. And there are various ways you can do it. When we're on a virtual facilitation and we've got 75 people, I often recommend that they turn their screen off, put a hand signal up or whatever, and let us know that there's something. They can type yellow in the chat box, and the person who's managed my facilitation for me can alert me when it's comes up. And when we get somebody who puts that yellow flag up in whatever manner works for the group that we're working with, then what we do is we pause the conversation and we allow that person, if they are willing, to share why they are feeling uncomfortable and think we need to pause the conversation and discuss something a little bit deeper. And if they don't feel that they can continue the conversation, we offer them the ability to step out for a minute while we get the conversation back on track, and they have the opportunity to regain that sense of emotional safety and stability so that they can come back and re-engage further in the conversation. So when someone shows me that there's a yellow flag, I use that as an opportunity to help learning amongst the group at large. And it often brings up something that we were going to talk about anyway. We're just getting to it a little bit sooner.
Yeah. And given all the intersectionalities, I would assume you have a lot of yellow flags that keep popping up. Do you often get them?
I don't often get them. I would say probably 25% of my facilitation, someone has a yellow flag that they bring up.
Okay.
In most cases, I've done this long enough that I'm able to navigate a conversation and see where a yellow flag is likely to start coming up. And I
Mm,
can kind of put the brakes on,
mm,
restructure the conversation, address the points that need to be addressed in advance of the yellow flags. But that comes with practice. You know, when I first started doing facilitations, there were plenty of yellow flags that I missed.
mm.
But as I've gotten further along in my career, I've started being able to address these. I do a lot of these workshops over and over, so I know where yellow flags are likely to come up. And so I've adjusted what we talk about in the order we talk about them so that I can kind of make sure that they're not hitting those points and we're addressing those things before we get to those points. And
Nice.
also, if I see someone has an attitude or a way of interacting that is disruptive, I will sometimes say, I appreciate that you want to learn more. I think this requires a different set of conversations than we're planning to have today. I'd like to speak with you after the session so that we can figure out how to have those conversations so that you can get what you need out of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. One of the most challenging things I find in facilitating groups is redirecting conversation. Because I could lead a workshop and know where something like a yellow flag is coming up, but I can't control what others in the group are going to say. And sometimes they'll use words or language that I know is going to be triggering, and it's already out. It's already out of their mouth before I could catch it. And so, yeah, facilitating that is challenging. And you
And
don't want to shut them down because they're expressing their own beliefs and truths. And in a neurodiverse space, it certainly is one of the challenges we have, is feeling like we do um, talk too much, say too much, take up too much space, verbally process in too much detail. And so there's always this balance I have of when I do really need to cut somebody off because they're the line of the way the direction they're going is not going to be healing or helpful for the group.
yeah, and that's, part of setting the intentions up front is we at least I do, and I have my other facilitators do this. We acknowledge that this is not a place of blame or shame, and that some of us are going to use language that is outdated or harmful because it's the only language we know to express ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then it is our responsibility as facilitators that when that language comes up, we go, thank you for sharing that thought. That language is no longer appropriate. Here's the language we should use. Then reframe the question for them using that language and then answer their question. And so what we're really doing is we're reinforcing the better language choice in multiple ways during that initial conversation. It takes the focus away from them, puts it on the facilitator, and it puts the work of reframing this on us, which then
Mm,
allows them to learn and everyone else to acknowledge that, oh, we had a moment, we've addressed it, it's taken care of. I don't have to do this emotional labor and raise the yellow flag.
mm-hmm. Yes, you are doing difficult, brave work.
I don't know that it's brave. I will say that when I was in my 20s and 30s, I would not have been able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I did not have the emotional capacity to do the labor, the emotional labor that this requires. But I have developed that ability over the years. And because I now have that ability, I now do this work so that others who don't have that ability don't have to do the work.
Mm, yes. And yet, I'm sure there are moments, I'll make the assumption because I feel them, that it's exhausting to hold that space. And I know I have chronic illness, and I believe you and I have shared stories about this, that how do you balance out the emotional toll and load of holding space for so many people and difficult conversations, just the energetic level of support that you're giving is so extreme. How does
It,
that
it,
feel in your
it can
body?
it can absolutely be exhausting. And I do have chronic illness. I have COPD. I have a movement disorder. um, this facilitating takes a toll physically and emotionally. So I'm in the habit of doing a light day beforehand
Mm-hmm.
and then a very, very light day after.
Mm-hmm. Bookending
So
it.
if I'm doing a facilitation, I tend not to have any meetings scheduled for that day.
Okay.
And I don't make promises for, client deliveries that day. I
Mm.
make sure that if I am emotionally unstable or exhausted afterwards, I've got that grace
Mm.
for myself and that space for me to just fritz out, do what I got to do to get back, and not worry about the pressures of the day. So I often tell people that a 40-minute, 45-minute speaking engagement where I share personal experiential stories of my life actually takes me 4 hours.
Oh, at least. Yes, yes. I feel
Because
that. Mm-hmm.
there's the prep time in advance to get myself in a position to actually share those stories, and then there's the deceleration afterwards, where the emotions in the mind start slowing down to the point where it can function again.
Yes.
And if I don't set that time, I'm not effective. You
Yes.
might not want to be around me because I'm raw. I might start crying at the mere mention of a Care Bear that fell off a table. Um, I'm aging myself. I'm sorry. I'm old.
No, I know Care Bears. I find sometimes I'll finish a group and I'll feel for a few moments lit up and engaged, like that was fantastic, and then then you start to feel the emotional and physical toll of it, and then I'm on the couch or in bed usually for a couple hours after grounding and regrouping, and it's such a juxtaposition and a paradox of like the on-screen presence, which is true and authentic and it is me, and then this is also me that like can't find words for hours after and might be crying about Care Bears or anything. Yeah.
You will. The one thing people learn about me, and I'm very clear about it when it happens and when I'm talking, I lose words in the middle of facilitation. I'll lose it, and I'll just look at people and go, you know what? That word is right there. It's going to come to me. We're just going to talk our way through this until, you know, um, whatever the word is comes out, and then I'm like, there it is, and now we can keep moving. I make light of these things because
Yes.
I am attention deficit.
Hmm.
I don't have a script in front of me
Hmm.
because then I come off very wooden and feel like I am talking like a robot.
Oh yeah.
And that's not good for anybody. So I don't script myself. And while I have, visual aids on my presentation device and I've got slides up and things like that, it doesn't have all the content. So
Right.
my
Right.
attention deficit brain does have to make those connections. And I try to put enough on the things that I can make those connections very quickly. But if I'm starting, to get overwhelmed, with audio sensations or visual sensations, and I'm having all of these inputs, and my ADHD brain is just going, okay, we can't filter this. Your antenna is on, and your tuner is just broken, so you're going to get everything all at once.
You aged yourself again with the antenna. I'm just saying. I picture the bunny ears. You slap the side of the TV. You try to get through the static.
Yes. Flip phones with the pull-out antenna.
Wrapping ourselves around with the telephone cord sitting in the pantry.
Yeah, but it's one of those things, and it's not just in the facilitation work that we do. My clients know that I will agree to a timeline and I will meet the timeline. They
Mhm.
also know that there are days where I'm not going to work on that project because my brain isn't going to work on that project because my brain has 17 other projects, some of which are for clients, some of which are for me, some of which are for my roommates that all need to get done. And so my brain will tell me what I'm going to work on that day because that's what it will allow me to work on.
Yes.
And I still get it all done eventually
Absolutely, right. Because we
and
'cause we
on
can.
deadline. I don't
With
miss
probably a
deadlines.
little and with a little urgency too. Do you use the spoon theory or do you talk about the spoon theory related to disability or just your energy levels?
I do talk about spoon theory sometimes. As a matter of fact, when the tick was the animated tick cartoon, the whatever, his catchphrase was spoon. And so I would sometimes use that when I was about to engage in something that was going to require a lot more spoons than I had. I would just yell spoon to get myself going. But I often now talk about it more along the lines of, I have this amount of energy and life force to give to this.
Yes.
And every time I do a task, a little bit of that drains away.
Yes.
And there are no little secret caches, hidden at the edge of the screen that I can go and jump on and pop open. That
Darn.
doesn't happen.
Yes.
So I know that I need the rest. And it took me many years to figure out that when my body tells me it's time to disengage and go lay down, that I need to disengage and go lay down, because if I don't, I'm not going to have the energy or the spoons to do the next thing that needs to be done.
Right. Right. For yourself or anyone else. Yes. Yes. I relate to so much of what you are saying, as I'm sure all of our audience, our neurodivergent audience will. So as we're starting to wrap it up, looking ahead into the future of what is possible to create inclusive culture in the workplace and beyond, like what do you see? What do you hope for? As yeah, what is your dream?
Well, what I'm seeing is that more aspects of our identities are coming to the forefront of conversations.
Mm-hmm.
It's patchwork, it's stilted. We make progress, then we have some setbacks, and then we make more progress.
Mm-hmm.
It is my hope that we don't forget any of our intersectional identities in the DEI space and
Mm-hmm.
in the corporate space, and that we always make sure that we're looking into those things moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
You can't address what you don't know, what you don't measure. And so we need to be looking at these things.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be including neurodiversity, chronic illness in our demographic questions when we're doing DEI surveys and audits, so that we know what the culture experiences are for people that have those identities. Because if we're not asking them those questions, they're not likely to be sharing it with us, because we probably don't know that we need to create space for it. And so we haven't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So with all my clients, I'm always like, let's look at the broadest set of demographic questions that we can ask,
Yeah.
provide as many options as we can, and then have the discussions about them when we start getting responses.
Yeah. I love that. And so many of my clients fear disclosing their neurodivergence in an interview, or even once they've received the job. When is it okay? When is it safe to do so? Should I ever? And of course, how are we going to ask for accommodations if it's not disclosed? But yet, still today, so many people are being let go for different reasons, because it's illegal to let go for instance, ADHD. But there's another reason somebody will give.
Yeah,
So it is definitely part of the conversation of what feels safe to disclose in an interview. And if you're already providing, like you're saying, a questionnaire of sorts, or as part of the conversation, if somebody were to ask me in an interview about ADHD or autism or my neurodivergence, or even coming from a trauma informed place, I would instantly, I mean, I've never experienced that. I look forward to the day that this happens. I would instantly feel like I'm in a space where I can start to disclose and ask for accommodations, and be so much more engaged in my work, and of course loyal to that company.
yeah. I I don't necessarily think it always has to be done in the interview process. And
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that many of these questions that we ask need to be asked in a way that is anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
so that we start getting a picture of what everyone in the organization is experiencing. And when we offer that a way to engage that is anonymous, we can start getting responses that people might not be safe disclosing face to face, or on a named, in a named survey where they're known.
Right.
And
So you're
that
saying one. Yeah.
anonymous reporting allows us to actually see the truth of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it communicates that this is a safer space, a more welcoming space for you to
Mm-hmm.
disclose that when you do need an accommodation.
Yeah, so you're speaking more for once they've already been hired and they're in your organization. Yeah, that
Yeah,
makes sense. That makes
ideally, we would like to create that in advance so that they feel safe, so that we feel
applying.
like we're able to disclose that up front. But a
Hmm.
lot of times it takes effort to create that space where people do feel comfortable expressing those things.
Hmm.
And if you're not doing it in an anonymous way for the organization as a whole, you'll never get to the point where people coming in the door are going to feel comfortable.
True, true. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a beautiful, inclusive world you're creating over there, and I very much enjoy and am inspired by your work and your humor. I get to enjoy your sense of humor in some of my Facebook groups as well too. So that is always appreciated.
I'm glad you enjoy it. It's a weird sense of humor.
I love it from one neurodivergent mind to another. It's fun. It's fun. So thank you so much, Jessi. I'm so glad we had this chance to talk today.
And so am I. And thank you again for having me on so that I could talk with you and share this conversation because honestly, I love talking and I love talking about this.
Just give me a microphone and an opportunity to talk. How can people find you? What's the best way?
So the best way to find me is to go to fichrpartners.com. That'll show you everything about my company. It will allow you to, see everything that we offer, and there's ways of reaching out to me through that. You can find me on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in my poetry and activism outside of my career, you can go to jessicajamespurdy.com. The website is up and running again. It had been down for a bit while I was doing some, reconfiguring of that.
Okay.
But it is up. Not all the features are working yet. I got distracted by other things and I haven't finished that project.
Go figure. Go figure. All of what Jessi just said will be in the show notes, of course. So, for those of you listening in the car, don't stop your car. Try to text yourself while you're driving. They will be in the show notes. No worries. So, thank you for that, Jessi. Also, for those of you listening or watching on YouTube, because we videotape this as well, if you ever want to, as a visual learner, watch the interviews, that's available to you. I've just started Neuro Community, which is a year-long group coaching program where we meet every Monday and then another co-working session. And it's been so much fun. And it seems to be attracting some really fascinating, creative people who are activists and helpers and healers themselves. I'm thrilled. I'm just really lit up by it. And it's available all year long. So you could join at any time. So you could reach out to me at pashamarlowe.com for any more info. But what a pleasure it has been talking to you, Jessi, and I look forward to neuroqueering with all of you out there again soon. Cool. Bye.